Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
And Aubrey, are you doing the land acknowledgement or did somebody else want to?
I wasn't planning to do it, so if you or Riley want to do it, that would be great.
Okay, I'll see if Riley can do it.
Cool.
No, did anybody else say they wanted to?
Nobody else has said that they want to do it.
Okay. Hi, Mare. It's nice to see you on the call.
Good evening. I've got volume now. That helps. I'm
Good to
either
see
muted or I
you.
don't have volume on or something. Yeah, nice to see you guys too. A lovely Wednesday evening, and it's still light out when we're having a meeting. That's a pretty good deal.
I mean, until the time changes this weekend.
Well, right. Spring forward, fall over.
This weekend.
Yep. Yeah.
Is that this weekend?
Yep, Sunday.
Ooh,
Kind of
didn't know
a
that.
sneaky deal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So if you want to know why you're tired all next week, that's why.
Right.
Yeah.
cool.
Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Um, would anybody want to do the land acknowledgement? I don't see Riley on yet, but Heidi or John or Christine?
Would that I had anything called up that would allow me to do that, I would.
Oh, Riley's on. Hey, Riley, do you want to go ahead and do the land acknowledgement?
Yeah, let's do that. Um, do we have it pulled up somewhere that I can read off of? It's in the email, ain't it? That would make the most sense.
Yeah, it's also
Also,
on the meeting agenda online too.
Okay. Apologies for my tardiness, y'all. Um, Max, I'm used to working on PC and not Mac operating software. Do 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 do.
Aubrey, do
Okay.
you have the PowerPoint that you can screen share?
sure, yeah, I can do that.
Thanks.
Hmm. you know, this is probably why they have the ability to, like, you can star things in your email.
That's okay. I think Aubrey's pulling up the
I
slideshow. with-
also have it pulled up. Oh, you got it. Never mind.
Awesome. Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah. Awesome. Hello, my name's Riley Jacobson. He is pronouns. So we, as members of the housing system in Missoula, acknowledge that we are in the homelands of the Salish and Kalispel people. Today, we offer our respect for their history and culture, for their ancient and continuing presence in this landscape, and for the path they have shown us in caring for this place for the generations to come. We recognize the ways in which systems of government have contributed to the disconnection of Indigenous peoples from these lands and their families, culture, and heritage. It is our responsibility as individuals and as a collective to acknowledge the white supremacist culture underlying our practices and to be accountable to demanding respect for tribal sovereignty and Indigenous cultures and the needs and perspectives of Indigenous peoples. As the committee continues to acknowledge with deep gratitude this land, may we also move toward action to redistribute power and resources to communities directly harmed by historical and current practices of colonization, to embrace conversations and behavior that lead to structural changes.
Thank you. Okay, so going on to introductions and roll call. I'm Katie Carlson. I go by she, her, and I am the chair of the committee. And you want to pop to you, Riley?
Hello, my name is Riley Jacobson. He has pronouns. I am the co-chair of the committee and represent the housing nonprofit sector.
Do you want to call on somebody to go next?
Oh, yeah, totally. Christine, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Riley. I'm Christine Littig, pronouns she, her, hers. I am a county commissioner appointed community member to this committee. Paul, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Paul Herendeen, he, his, and I represent the financial sector and Clearwater Credit Union on the committee. Let's see, I can't see folks here. Nick, how about you?
Thanks, Paul. Nick Chaussee, he, his, and I am a community member on this committee. Let's see, I gotta scroll down here. How about Lori?
Sure, thanks, Nick. My name's Lori Davidson. I'm the director of the Missoula Housing Authority. She, her pronouns. And what is it, John? An ex officio member? Is that what it's called?
Mhm.
Member appointed through the ordinance itself, the director of the Housing Authority. So I'll call on John next.
Well, thanks. I'm John Engen, Mayor of the City of Missoula. He, his, please call me John. Sorry, I don't know what happened to my video.
And you want to call on the next person? I think Will maybe hasn't gone.
Sure. Hey, Will Seaburn, community member, he, him pronouns. And how about Heidi? I don't think you've gone yet.
I haven't. I was wondering why the meeting hadn't started and then realized I never turned my computer off of mute from our test run at council chambers earlier. So Heidi West, she, her, I just go by Heidi, and I'm the council appointee to this board.
How about Ricky?
Hello, I'm Ricky Henderson, she, her pronouns, and I am the housing programs manager for the city of Missoula. call on Montana.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I'm Montana James. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Deputy Director in our Community Development Division in Community Planning, Development, and Innovation at the City of Missoula. Aubrey?
Thanks, Montana. Hi, everyone. I'm Aubrey, she, her pronouns. I'm the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Program Coordinator. And I'll call on Emily.
Couldn't find my unmute. Hi, I'm Emily Harris Shears. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Administrator.
Great, I think we got everyone. Okay, so just going through the norms that we've had, respecting other people's perspectives, be sure to step up and step back, stay present, raise your hand when you're trying to contribute, accept loose ends, and celebrate successes. So thank you. All right, and then anybody that needs to register for the webinar, public comment. Okay, and then moving on to the minutes. Did everybody get a chance to approve or review the minutes from last time? I'm sorry I did miss the meeting, so I can't really contribute. But if there's no changes, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from February 9th?
I'll make that
Motion
motion.
to- I second.
Thank you. If no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Great. Okay, so Larchmont, sorry, I had that we were doing the Missoula Housing Authority presentation first.
Yep, we can do that. I just have to stop screen sharing.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm guessing there was no financial budget update. Okay, great.
There is a budget update.
Oh, there
It
was.
just doesn't have a slide. Yep.
Oh, okay. So
Do you want me to do that now?
Sure.
Cool, thanks. Hi, nice to see you all. I just wanted to provide an update about our second allocation of the year, which we were planning to direct the Scottsdale proceeds to. And there is a significant delay with the sale of the Scott Street parcel. And we are not sure when it's going to occur. At this point, we think maybe fall, but we're not sure. So at this point, we're recommending that we not anticipate that revenue this year, which would mean that we have the $1.3 million that you allocated for the first portion of the year for the unified application round that closed last week. So I just wanted to provide an update on that. And as we get more information about potential revenue, we'll certainly bring it here. And I'm hoping to share a capitalization update with you all in April.
Great, thank you. So then moving on to the Housing Authority presentation.
Yes. Yeah, you asked me to, I'm going to share my screen here, hopefully. You asked me to present a little bit about an overview of low-income housing tax credits. So I've prepared a few slides. They may or may not be in order here as I speak. But essentially, low-income housing tax credits are, it's a federal program that is governed by the IRS. It comes out of the US Treasury. So it was created by Congress for private developers and investors to provide more affordable rental housing. And the thing about tax credits is if you're going to develop affordable housing, homes for that people can afford, that have rents that are not raised in reaction to the market, housing tax credits are about the only game in town. You can do very, very small projects with things like home and CDBG. ARPA funds have been really useful in the past year or two, but they're not going to be around forever. That's a one-time source of funds. So if you really want to be able to develop small projects, 30 units or more, large projects, low-income housing tax credits is where it's at. It's the only thing that we have available to us in the country, not just in Montana, but in the country. So the tax credits are allocated through by the U.S. Treasury to state housing finance agencies. Our state housing finance agency is the Montana Board of Housing, and its board members are appointed by the governor. Each state receives an allocation based on population, and because Montana has such a small population, we get the minimum allocation, and that's currently about $3.22 million, which translates to about $21 million worth of projects per year. So the thing about tax credits is the units must be affordable for people earning 60% of area median income or below. They did create a new thing called income averaging, which allows you to go up to 70% of area median income, but it's very difficult to use, and investors are really not in favor of using it. So most projects are going to remain at 60% of area median income or below. So any population can be housed in low-income housing tax credit properties. The one demographic that it cannot serve is students. You cannot house full-time students in housing tax credit properties. And the rents are set based on, it's a HUD guideline based, you have maximum rents that are set through the state, and it's based on things like fair market rents in your area and area median incomes, and it varies and it goes up, and sometimes it even goes down as the years, as you go, because it changes every year, and it could, like I said, it can go up or it can go down. The 9% credit, actually, I want to go to a different slide here. I want to go to the slide first, so I can tell you about the different kinds of credits. The 9% credit is the most commonly used. You can only build maybe 35, maximum 40 units with a 9% credit here in Montana, and it covers about 70% of the project cost. There is a 4% credit, which covers about 30% of your project cost, and can be an acquisition credit, or you can have a new construction or a rehab project that use 4% credits as well, and they're combined with tax-exempt bonds for the permanent financing. So Guard District here, this photo on the right side was a 9% project. It's 37 units. The Palace Rehab down here at the bottom, we did with 9% credits, 4% acquisition credits, and then we used another kind of credit called a historic credit, but that's kind of a different pot of funding, so I didn't really include it here. So,
and it does look like we have a question from Paul.
Yes, Paul.
Thanks, Lori. When you talk about a 9% credit or a 4% credit, what is that referring to?
Well, when you go down to a tax credit calculation here, this kind of illustrates that. So say you've got $1 million project. Some of your costs are not eligible for credits, and that means that, and primarily that's your land cost. So if you got $1 million total project cost and 200,000 of that was land, then you can only get tax credits on 800,000 of your project cost. So you take your tax credit percentage, in this case, it's either 9% or 4%, and that tells you how many credits you're going to receive in a year. And the investors get those credits over a period of 10 years. So in this example, 72,000 a year, they end up getting over a period of 10 years, 720,000 in credits. And when I talk about the tax credits for the investors, this is a direct dollar for dollar reduction in the amount of taxes that they have to pay. So they get, so then you've figured out how much, how many credits could be received, but then the investor gives you a price on the credits. And those are based on things like the amount of depreciation you have, the rate of return, the current interest rates. There's all kinds of things that go into that calculation for them to determine how much they're going to pay you for each of those credits. So, and every investor has a different way that they calculate that. They all have their own spreadsheets. They're all proprietary. They don't, well, they sort of share that with us. But it's the investor who does that calculation. So once you take the price for the credits, and 85 cents per credit is right around what we're seeing now. So this is pretty current. So for your $1 million project, you're getting $612,000. Nick, do you have a question?
Yeah, but I think I want to let you finish here because I don't want to detract from it. So can we come back?
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So by bringing this capital into the project at the front end, it allows you to reduce the amount of debt that you have to pay. And that's what allows you to keep the housing affordable. So let's go back to this slide, because the way that the 9% credits are all competitive, and the state, each state writes a qualified allocation plan, and that qualified allocation plan tells developers who want to apply for the credits what kinds of things the state agency is looking for, what they think is important in their area. And there's a scoring system that goes along with this. So I'm not going to read all of these to you. You can read them yourself. And their geographic distribution is another thing that they consider. It's the Board of Housing who allocates the credits after they receive all of the proposals, all of the applications for the credits. And the interesting thing about the way our state allocates to project, let me say first, anymore, we get 18 to 20 projects per year in this that apply for the credits. But there's only enough credits to pay for maybe 5 or 6 of those projects. So you can see that it's really, really competitive. And to make it even more risky for a developer, the Board of Housing has complete discretion. So you get a score based on all of these characteristics of your application. The Board of Housing staff scores them all, gives them to the Board of Housing to consider, but the Board of Housing doesn't have to follow the scoring. They have complete discretion. If one of them wants a project that's in their district or a project that they like that is not high on the scoring list, they can propose that to the rest of the board, and the board can vote and decide to fund that project rather than a project that's higher scoring. So you can see it's a really risky proposition for developers when they apply for credits. They have all these upfront costs. They have to have land secured. They have to have market studies, geotech reports, environmental reports. They have a whole series of things that they have to do, all of which costs money. Then they apply. They don't know if the scoring is going to actually get them into the highest scoring round. And then the Board of Housing may or may not allocate to them. And so if they want to keep carrying those costs over to the next year, then they can apply for credits again the next year. But then they have to renew all of the reports that they did. They have to make sure that they can hold the land and carry the land costs as they move forward. Developing with tax credits is a risky business. Affordable housing is not for the faint of heart.
Riley, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. So when you say that the Board of Housing has complete discretion in who they vote for, this is kind of a multi-part question. Is the Board of Housing, you may have covered this, is that a state or a federal board?
It's a state board.
Okay.
And its members are appointed by the governor.
Okay. And so perhaps it's just my mind. I find it interesting that they have points for scoring something and they can completely disregard those points. How does that factor into people who don't have income, who are working with housing vouchers and the projects that are in that sector? Does that make sense?
I'm not quite sure what you're
Okay.
asking.
So maybe this is more of a statement. Let me find the words for it here. How are the projects being prioritized based on the needs of the community, especially for those who do not have income?
So that is done through what we call market studies. And the market study tells you how many people there are in the area who are at the income levels that your project plans to serve, how long it's going to take to lease those projects up, a whole variety of factors, how many other low-income units there are in the area, what their vacancy rate is. Pretty much every area in the state of Montana at the current time needs these properties. And so they all can prove that they need them, that they have enough low-income people that to be housed here, that I would say that throughout the state, as far as I know, the properties that are funded with tax credits have very, very low vacancy rates, probably under 1%. Certainly here in Missoula, we are under 1% almost all the time. So what the Board of Housing is more looking at these days is geographic distribution, to be sure that, number one, the places that need the housing the most are being served, but number two, that they are geographically distributing these units across the entire state and not concentrating them, for example, in the metropolitan areas, Billings, Bozeman, Missoula. They want to get them out into the rural areas as much as they can and onto the reservations. So it makes them even more competitive. Missoula, for example, gets an award of 9% tax credit through one developer, another maybe every 2 years. So it's a very, very competitive market out there for these. So we kind of went through this tax credit calculation. But one of the things that I will say, Riley, is that the Board of Housing is starting to give more consideration to projects that will be able to put vouchers, project-based vouchers, into the units. So you get a little more points in the scoring when you have some kind of rental subsidy attached to the project that you're proposing. So from the tax credit calculation, you can see that you got a pretty big gap here. I mean, if this is a $10 million project, you're looking at a really big gap. You know, you're looking at a $400,000 gap in this $1 million project. Multiply that by 10, you're looking at a $4 million or a 400,000 as opposed to a $4 million gap. So you do have some permanent financing, but okay, so your rents are capped. You can't raise them according to the market. You have set expenses. The expenses go up at a certain rate every year. You have debt service. You have to pay a loan, a permanent loan. So the amount that you can pay on that permanent loan is governed by the amount of income the property brings in. And so your rents are capped and you can't raise them when your expenses go up. And so it reduces the amount of the loan that you can get. So you not only have to be able to cover the amount of the loan, but you need what's called a debt coverage ratio. So you have to make not only enough money to cover the debt service and all your expenses, but then you need maybe 15 to 20% more than that, because your investors and your banks will require that. So, so you are looking at a project that needs some way to fill the gap. And what we use for that gap funding are things like home dollars, CDBG dollars, housing trust fund dollars. The Federal Home Loan Bank has a program called AHP, which can be grants or loans. Sometimes there's other state or local funds. In Missoula, we are fortunate enough to have the Housing Trust Fund, not just the state Housing Trust Fund, but our local one. We have no other funding at the state level. Most other states have housing trust funds or state housing tax credits that they have put into place through their through legislative action. Montana does not. Montana does have a housing trust fund at the state level. It was created years ago. The one thing it doesn't have is funding for the housing trust fund at the state level. So all the money we get through housing trust funds at the state level now are federal pass-throughs. That's federal money that they're distributing. We have a mechanism in place at the state level for a housing trust fund, but the legislature has not seen fit to give us a way to fund that housing trust fund. We are very fortunate in Missoula that we have a governmental body that has seen fit to fund a local housing trust fund. It's so unusual in Montana. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that. It was, and Montana and all of you who work at the development at that part of the city and the city council, because this is absolutely a wonderful thing. The other way that you fill the funding gap is you defer a developer fee. And developer fees, you know, people think, oh my gosh, the developer fee, it's so awful. Developers shouldn't be able to make so much money. But the thing about a developer fee is, I want you to look at the risk that's being taken here. Where's my risk? No, not there. Here it is. So you have an investor, a bank, someone like PNC Bank, US Bank, Enterprise Communities, and they give you this capital up front based on that tax credit calculation. Then you have a general partner, and that's generally someone like me, someone like the Housing Authority, someone like Homeward. There are private entities who are general partners as well, but the general partner who only owns 0.1 or 0.1% of the project takes all of the risk. They guarantee it's going to get developed and constructed. They guarantee that it's going to operate and be able to pay debt service and cover that, make that 1.15 or 1.2% debt coverage ratio. They guarantee that it's going to be managed well. They guarantee the delivery of credits. And if there is even one tenant who is not in compliance with that low income requirement, if they go even $1 over the income limit, you lose the tax credits for that unit. You might even lose more than that. So you're guaranteeing to the investor that every year they're going to get that $72,000 worth of credits. And that means that it's really, really important that every tenant that is housed in this property, you have verified their income every way that you can, found every source of income that they possibly can bring to the table. Because if you go over income, if they are over income and you lease them up, you do get a little cure period. You get a 60-day cure period. But if you don't catch it in time, if say you don't catch it for a year and this person who's over income has been living there for a year, the general partner writes a check. The Housing Authority writes a check. Homeward writes a check to the investor to cover the amount of tax credits that they did not get because we screwed up. So this is a risky business. It's a very risky business. The investor gets benefits. They get this dollar for dollar reduction in federal tax liability. They get deductions for depreciation and project losses because they're the 99.9% owners. So they get all of the losses on the project, and that reduces their taxes even further. But they're also doing good things. I mean, for them, that's a good thing, right? They're also doing good things by stabilizing and investing in local communities. They get CRA investment credits. It gives them marketing and PR opportunities. So the investor gets a lot of benefits here too. But again, it is a community benefit. This is the only way we can build affordable housing. Paul, you have a question?
I do, thanks. I was searching for the unmute there. I'll keep it brief. Two quick questions. roughly how much of the project cost is recouped through depreciation for the investors? And then who are the investors typically in Missoula projects, if you're able to share any of that?
I don't know the answer to the depreciation question. Imagine any rental property that you have, all of the depreciation that it sees in a year, which could be $200,000-$300,000. They get to use that depreciation to reduce the amount of taxes that they pay. 100% of the depreciation that the property experiences is passed on to the investor. And it is people like in Missoula, US Bank is a pretty common investor. PNC Bank did the Palace. Enterprise Community Partners is doing both Trinity and Bellagio right now. So they're a big investor in the community. There may be others, but these are the ones that we've used in the past. I want to talk just a little bit about 4% credits too. We'll get to that, but I want to show you this partnership organizational chart. This is Trinity's. I think everybody probably knows what Trinity, the development is. It's 2 sites, and one on Mullen Street and one on Cooley Street. Homeward and the Housing Authority are partners in this project, as well as we have the city as a partner. The county donated the land. This is a 4% project, so it's going to have more debt than a 9% project would. This is a typical project organizational chart. That doesn't look, that doesn't look too bad. You can kind of look at that and say, okay, I get that. And then this is just a quick, oops, wrong one. Quick look at the at an overview of the Mullen site and the Cooley site of Trinity. The Mullen site includes this building here, which is going to be the navigation center, serving our people suffering from houselessness. This part of the project is 30 units of permanent supportive housing, and they'll be supported by housing vouchers from the Housing Authority. And this rest of the building here is 100 units of housing for people at 60% of AMI or below. And then on the Cooley site, we have 72 units that are at 60% of AMI or below. This is actually an income averaging project. So we will be able to serve some people up to 70% of AMI here. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but just so you know that between the vouchers and the income averaging, we'll be serving people from 0% to 70% of AMI here at the Trinity site. So that was a pretty simple ownership structure, but this is Bellagio, the other one, the other 200 unit project that the Housing Authority is involved in. I don't expect you to read this. I just want you to have a little bit of a concept of how complicated these deals can be. They are really difficult. They are, there's a million things that are involved in even putting together a structure like this. So at Bellagio, this is just a quick little rendering of what we hope it will look like.
And it looks like Will has a question.
Yeah, Will.
Thanks, Laurie. I was curious, so is it true that if there's no matter if it's a 4%, 9%, no matter what the actual source total that comes from low income housing tax credits, let's say, I think in that example you showed that it was probably 60 or 70% of the development budget. So does that mean only 60 or 70% of the units need to be within the LIHTC requirements, or even though it's only 60%, every single unit gets covered by that?
Every single unit gets covered by it.
And is that based on the IRS code, or is that a decision that the local Montana Housing Board makes?
No, it's IRS. These are IRS regulations.
Okay.
And you can have units in a project that are not income restricted, but in that case, you're not getting tax credits for them. It's part of your ineligible basis. So they have to be removed from the project cost.
Got it. Okay.
So for
Okay,
example,
that makes
for example, at Russell Square, we actually do have some units. One of the buildings there where our offices are, that was not in basis. So we didn't get any tax credits for that building. And the units that are up above there are income restricted only at the state level because we promised the state we would keep the incomes at 80% or below there. But it couldn't be tax credits or we wouldn't be able to house people up to 80%.
got it. So it can be part of a larger development, but it's just not included in your basis for determining how much tax credit you can get, tax credit
Correct.
investment you can get. Okay.
Which
thanks for
means you
explaining
need
that.
another, yeah, and that means you need another source of funding to pay for it because you're not getting tax credits for it. So, Christine, did you have a question?
Yeah, actually, just a quick one, Lori. When you said housing authority voucher, is that interchangeable with Section 8 voucher? Are we not using that terminology anymore? They're both the same.
They're the same. Yeah, the housing authority voucher is a Section 8 voucher. It's also called housing choice voucher. It's also called tenant-based or project-based vouchers. They're all the same thing. So then there's a timeline involved with this too. As I said, affordable housing isn't for the faint of heart, and you got to have some resources to be able to do it, because it can take you 2 years or maybe even longer to get to the point where you get credits. So you have to find your land, you have to have it some kind of a purchase agreement in place or be in possession of the land before you apply. You have to have all of these studies done. Then you can go forward and apply for the credits. Then there's another few months while they decide. They go through a process to decide who's going to get allocated the credits. You receive your reservation of credit. You get stuff underway as quickly as you can. With the 9% credit, you have to have your project constructed and leased up in 2 years. And you have to increase 10% of your cost in the first year. The 4% credits don't have that 2-year limitation. I do want to point out in the 4% credits, these have to be big projects. In Montana, we have to have a minimum of 180, and around 200 units is more doable with a 4% because you're carrying a lot more debt. Only 30-ish% of your project is being covered with the tax credits. So you are carrying a huge amount of debt on these properties, and you still have to meet your debt coverage ratio and pay all your operating costs. And so you have to, and your rents are still capped, and you still can't house students, full-time students. So, your 4% projects have to have this economy of scale. They have to be big, which means you have to find land. So in your 9% credits, you've completed the project. Placed in service means that you've leased up all the units to income qualified tenants. And then the tax credits start to flow to the investor. Now, if you have a lease up schedule with the investor, because they base their rate of return on your lease up schedule, and you don't meet it, you pay a penalty every month. So if you guarantee, go ahead.
Sorry, it looks like Nick had a question.
Oh, yeah. Nick?
Thanks, Lori. Is there a scenario in which these projects after 30 to 40 years have a sunset and can convert to market rate?
They can.
Okay.
Yes, they can. In fact, the Housing Authority owns one of those. Wildflower Apartments was a property that it is old enough that it only had a 15-year period of compliance. No, I think it had a 30-year period of compliance. I can't remember offhand, but they when that period of compliance was up, they sold it and they put it on the market. And for profit, anyone could have bid on that property. The reason we purchased it was so that we could guarantee that it would remain affordable in perpetuity. And so yes, LIHTC properties do, I won't say often, but it's not unusual for them to convert to market rate properties after that period of compliance is done.
Okay, thank you.
Paul?
Thanks. Quick follow-up on that. Do you have a sense of like how much of the affordable housing stock in Missoula is going to be converting to market rate in the next, I don't know, say 5 years?
None. I
That's it.
say,
Thank you.
I say with, I'm pretty confident that none of it is going to be converting. Creekside, which Homeward purchased, and Wildflower, which MHA purchased, were the two most at risk. And those are now secured as affordable housing for our community.
And where does the money come from for those purchases?
Banks.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, banks. Sometimes there's some fancy financing that you can do. I think Homeward used I don't remember what it was called, a 503. They used some kind of a bond for it, but the Housing Authority used a loan, a bank loan.
Thanks.
We also put some of our own money into it. That was just a down payment. Emily?
Hi, Lori. Thanks. I just wanted to offer that we are tracking expirations of LIHTC and other affordable projects as part of the Place to Call Home work. And one potential future source would be the reserve balance of the Affordable Housing Trust. And that's some of what we envision around as projects expire, that they could be preserved through the reserve balance.
It'd have to be a pretty big reserve balance.
Yeah, well, maybe it could contribute to the stack or something.
And that would be excellent. That would be a wonderful use for the Housing Trust Fund. We could have used that at Wildflower for sure, and I'm sure Homeward could have used it at Creekside as well. So, and that about, I will say that most projects these days have 46 years of compliance. So the investor is in these until about year 15. That's when their obligation is up. They've collected all their credits. They're not, after 15 years, they're not in danger of any tax credit recapture. They are sometimes willing to sell those properties to the general partner. That's happened for us in a couple of our properties. Maclay Commons and Russell Square Apartments, the investor wanted out of those properties, so they sold it to us either very, very, very cheaply, and I mean like $100,000, or they didn't charge us at all. So the investors typically want out at 15 years, but not always. And then you're still, whoever buys it from them, is still obligated to keep it as an affordable property for anywhere from 30 to 40 years and up to 46 years. That's all I got for you. Here, you want to see some puppies? You get to see some puppies. Will?
I was just going to ask, my recollection on Creekside was it was a conduit bond that allowed Homeward to basically get a below market interest rate to purchase. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, I can
remember.
remember
And it was the city that provided like I don't understand the mechanics of it. Like the city of Missoula provided its like bond status or whatever to be able to access that lower rate.
Yes, that's correct. Christine, I think you are next.
Will and I were on the same page. I'm good.
Okay. Nick, you have something?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of any sort of financing options to convert market rate to affordable? Say there's a, yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's a avenue in which you could do that.
We have actually looked at purchasing properties that were for sale with the intent of seeing if we could run them with affordable rents. Mm-hmm. There isn't any mechanism that I know of for financing that, unless maybe tax exempt loan or a tax exempt bond could be brought into play. It would depend on the purchase price of the property, of course. It would depend on how much rehab it needed.
Right. I
Easier,
guess, sorry.
yeah, easier to preserve than it is affordable housing than it is to convert it to affordable housing, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, and I guess it'd just be cool if there was a way to, for instance, you have owners that have owned properties for a long time, right? And they're seeing where rents are going, and they're not trying to price people out and contribute to the problem. But they're also going to realize a significant gain at sale because they've owned it for so long, and their depreciated basis is practically nothing. If there was a mechanism in which they could contribute that towards affordable housing, taking some sort of credit that way or something, I don't know, just kind of throwing something out there, but
it's a good thought.
More complicated than I know how to figure out. So
yeah, it's a great thought. I'd love it if we could find some owners that were willing to look into that.
Right.
Emily, did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to plug the trust fund again. That is a role the trust fund can play, Nick, in some of the funding work. And in fact, we have a application that's doing sort of that in one of the unified route applications too. So as a local source, that's something people can seek out and to either convert or, well, actually just to convert.
Yeah, thanks for reminding there.
Great. Oh, Riley?
Yeah, thank you. So is there a way that we can incentivize homeowners to kind of work in tandem with MHA in order to not only preserve these properties, but also help build projects that aren't necessarily, what's the word I'm looking for? That keep more money in our community rather than just sending it back to banks. Not that like sitting here, saying banks are bad or anything. It's just if MHA and Homeward and all these agencies are taking most, if not all of the risk for the projects, whereas the investors are kind of getting a lot of the tax credit benefits, is there a way that we can use the trust fund to kind of bring some of that tax credit benefit into our nonprofits and our community rather than just sending it up the line?
Boy, I don't know. I will say that our local banks, like Glacier Bank, which is First Security Bank, they do invest in tax credits. So some of that money is, I guess Glacier isn't, well, it's statewide. I'm not sure how much they extend outside the state, but I know that they do invest in tax credits. First Interstate Bank is invested in tax credits. I don't know the answer to that, Riley. Paul, do you have any thoughts?
Just two brief ones. Order of corporate pride, I should point out the Clearwater is not really able to do any of this because we're a not-for-profit and don't get any
Right.
credits. And Riley, to your point, I think you've hit on one of the central challenges of implementing this kind of policy through tax credits rather than direct payments. And it's, in my opinion, a structural flaw and totally out of the hands of any of the housing providers.
Yeah. And I totally agree, Paul. I've said for many, many, many years that we've really put, not us, but the country has put all of their affordable housing eggs in one basket, and it's called low-income housing tax credits. There really isn't any other way to develop any significant amount of affordable housing without tax credits. And yeah, who benefits? It benefits banks, it benefits accountants, it benefits attorneys, it benefits the community too. Absolutely it does. But if it wasn't benefiting all those other people, we wouldn't be able to get the benefit of it. I agree with Paul 100%. They've narrowed the playing field so much that you have no choice anymore. And it's a risky business. I think you can see it's really, really risky. It takes money to be able to even apply for the credits. And the general partners, those of us who develop it, we take a huge amount of risk with every property. Riley?
Yeah. So Lori, feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. I did hear you mention that with these projects, there is a rental cap. And so if rent exceeds here and MHA or whoever is renting there goes above here, then money has to be paid somewhere. Is that kind of accurate, or is the rental cap like rent has to be at this level for these projects? You can't go above it. Okay.
Correct.
So John, this might be a question for you and the rest of the community. How is it that with these projects, they can institute a rental cap, but per Montana State Legislature, we can't have policies around rental caps for our communities? Is that accurate?
Well, don't forget, this comes from the federal government, not from the state government.
Right, kind of pretty different animals, Riley, but by virtue of the fact that the federal tax code is providing a benefit to investors, the feds can set the rules all day long with regard to what kind of properties qualify at what rent in order to receive that tax credit. And that capacity to set rents is hampered by the state legislature, right? We don't have rent controls. We don't have landlord licensing in the state. And so, yeah, they're much different animals, but but we lack statutory authority to really control any of that private rental market. Where we do have leverage is where we make investment, right? So if we're investing either some of our federal allocations through the Community Development Block Grant Program or the HOME program, we can certainly, in addition to the sideboards that are placed on those programs by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, we can also apply some of our own standards to that as well. At the end of the day, when we're investing local public dollars, particularly in the form of tax increment financing, TIF dollars, that's where we really do have leverage, and we can require that rents or prices be at a percentage of area median income. There's a lot of leverage there, but with regard to the federal tax credit program, just kind of a different. It really is that federal leverage, and I think the feds are very much interested in ensuring for the benefit of what is a significant tax savings that they get some assurance over a period of time that those units are going to be affordable. Boy, I speak and a conversation ends. I kind of like that. I have that effect on people.
Is there any more questions or anything? And thank you, Lori. That was a great presentation.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. Does somebody have their hand up? I thought I just saw one. Okay. Okay. So if no other questions, we'll move on to the Larchmont. And I want to apologize. Did I skip over public comment on non-agenda items? We did have one comment on the Larchmont that is on the website if anybody wants to go see it. So we'll move on to the Larchmont discussion.
Cool. So I am excited that two members asked to have this discussion tonight, and I wanted to just give some quick framing on this discussion. As we said in the email, there's no expectation of a decision that's not your jurisdiction in this project or anything like that. The project has already moved on. But the two members wanted to just talk about the Larchmont. It sounded like there was some disappointment in the decision that was made, and just furthered a bigger conversation about what the Oversight Committee's role might be in projects like this in the future, and being able to give or share comment and things like that. So we just wanted to bring this space to give people a chance to talk about it, ask questions, and then also maybe talk about how you might want to address future developments. And, you know, I want to just name that when I was watching the Larchmont hearing with the county commissioners, there was a lot of opposition for the project, but there was very little support for the project that was voiced through written or in-person comment. So I think that's just something, if you haven't watched or reviewed that comment, I just wanted to highlight that. And I think that, you know, sometimes electeds go with what they're hearing. And so I just wanted to name that. That's sort of where our conversation went with the members that recommended this. And just want to name too that there's a clear boundary that if you all as committee members would like to elevate something or provide comment on your own or as a committee, that needs to come from you and will not come from staff. There won't be a staff request. So I just want to name that would really be an awesome reminder that not hearing from us is not an endorsement or a non-endorsement, and really should be led by the committee. And yeah, we did receive public comment from Tate from the Rocky Mountain. I'm gonna get the name wrong, but it's in your email and also on the website. And I clarified with Tate as well that tonight's discussion is not a decision-making role for you all, and just a space for you to have discussion. So I'm gonna turn it over. Does that give you enough context? Cool.
Does anybody want to start with their thoughts on the Larchmont or feelings of how we could contribute going forward if there is a project?
Sure, I'll just jump in briefly. Disappointing to see that project not go forward. The point about lack of vocal support, I think, is well taken. Not clear to me what our role in that would be. I think we might be effective if we are able to speak as a group. Other than that, we're just going to be citizens. And there's quite a bit of community organizing work going on under a couple of different umbrellas at the moment. And those might be good opportunities to mobilize some support for that. That's about all I have to say.
This is Laura Bird. I apologize, I'm coming in late. I was also disappointed in the decision. I voiced that very strongly in a separate meeting, just off the fact that we continue to struggle with affordable housing in this town. There's not enough units for the demand. And I had, spoke of my difficulties recently. I was in a car accident and I didn't have transportation for a month and a half. I walked and I rode the bus everywhere. And it is impossible to survive in this town without a car. And there are so many people in this community who cannot drive a car. It just astounds me how disconnected a lot of people in this community still are. And I did read the letter about the historical significance of Fort Missoula, and I'm an Indigenous person. I totally respect viewpoint, but there's a lot of land out there. And I'm sure that, there could be a compromise given. And if there's anything we can do as a group to support future developments like this, I am more than happy to support those. So thank you.
Riley, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with what everyone is saying, and it's very disappointing to see that we have the opportunity to build more housing within the Missoula Valley. I deeply respect Missoula's history and the lands that we have here. There's also a certain amount of looking at where we're at as a community, looking at how many people we have coming in here and how we improve our housing infrastructure, especially considering that land is very limited here. We have mountains on every side. It's why Missoula is so beautiful. It's one of the many reasons. However, I always feel like we're at this transitionary stage, especially right now in our community. And so it's like, how do we preserve the integrity of our history while equally moving forward into what the future is as a community? And so I'm always going to be bummed when I hear about housing projects getting turned down, especially just considering where my focus comes from on housing. And I'm really interested in how we as a community and how we as a committee can support these projects while voicing our opinions and concerns and just trying to build more infrastructure for Missoula.
I'll just, so I was one of the other people that really voiced being very disappointed in the decision. I think it kind of leads into the discussion about the committee roles. And I think one thing I would like to see is that when future projects are coming up, that we do, draft a letter together that says that we're in support of it. I know that they're doing the study of all the county lands that are owned, and that might take a while. But I think that, as they're going through that process, putting support behind places that could have larger developments is really important, and it's part of our goal as this committee. Well,
Yeah, just a thought about what role the committee would play in kind of voicing support for any particular project. I think the one thing I would just want to be mindful of is what's our criteria for which project we're going to support. Is it as simple as any project that's going to add new housing units? Is it as simple as any project that's going to add new income restricted housing project? I just think I'd be a little wary of having a blanket policy of like anything that is going to add, I just would want to be thoughtful about what would be the parameters in which we would do something. And then just the only other just thought I would throw out is, because it's kind of interesting, I think when we were first going over our the bylaws and everything, and I think being explicit that when it comes to the housing trust fund allocations, this committee doesn't have a say on specific projects. So if we don't have a say on specific projects as it relates to the housing trust fund, by extension, does that say anything about whether or not we should be having a say on, as a committee, on projects that don't involve the housing trust fund? I don't know what the answer is to that question, but I think that's something we consider. I think a reasonable person could conclude, if our main purview is the housing trust fund and we don't make a say on specific projects on that, does it, it may not make sense that the committee is voicing a committee opinion. Now, what we do as individuals is a totally different story. But there's something there, I think, that's worth asking ourselves in terms of what should the scope of this committee be.
Are your thoughts any different? Because the Larchmont, it wasn't the actual vote on the project, it was vote on the feasibility study. Do you think it's more appropriate to be able to comment and say we think feasibility studies should move forward versus then specific projects? Because I guess my thought is it wasn't the actual project that was supposed to be moving forward. It was just the feasibility study, which seemed more disappointing that didn't even get moved forward.
I think that goes into the first question I had about establishing the criteria for when we would weigh in, and like I'm open that the answer could be yes or no to that question. But I think it's like, what I would want to avoid is a situation where we don't have guidelines in place for how we'll weigh in. And so we're just reacting to every new proposal that comes up. So would want to be thoughtful about, establishing some guidelines we could all agree on about when we would kind of say something as a committee. I think that's an interesting question though, about like, if it's just to seek out more information and understand the feasibility. But again, I also think like these things are very complex. And I think it's challenging, I think, with such a complex issue to make sure we fully understand it, to know what we should be taking. And I just want to be clear, I have my like own opinions about the issue in general. I'm more speaking from a process perspective about like what is within our kind of purview and what's not.
Emily?
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Will. I just want to elevate that the purview of this oversight committee is more than the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and that's really outlined in the bylaws that you have around your duties and responsibilities, and that you can be proposing policy recommendations, you can be proposing changes that might support the market. And I would sort of encourage you all to think broader into the full place to call home work. And we've been very focused on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in this first year because we've been working to implement it, but we plan to ask for your guidance and expertise on many of the strategies as we implement them, really all of them as we implement them. So I would really see your role more as being a supporter of affordable housing, and then really referring back to your bylaws to like specify, but this does fall within your bylaws.
Paul?
Thanks, and thank you, Emily, for clarifying that, because that adds some context to what I was about to say, which is that I'm very much in favor of these projects. I'm very much in favor of public support, but it did to me feel a little bit outside what this organization, this group here, is intended to do. And to Will's point, I mean, I've been involved in some other groups that attempted to do similar things in the past. And we found that we kind of bogged down in the process to reach a unanimous statement on projects. And that's going to be a real challenge if we want to go forward with this. I guess my personal opinion is that we might not be the right group to do this, and that public support, public leverage might do better to come from other folks.
This is Laura Bird. Is there a group out there that's actually advocating and doing that that we could connect with? I mean, I see Will's position totally. I do. I always put everyone else's viewpoints in perspective, but sometimes we can have conversations, but the bottom line is that we do not have enough affordable housing in Missoula. And so I joined this committee in the hopes of, helping that situation, and I don't see that happening. So I just, I like what, that we are able to look at the viewpoints, look at terms of affordable housing, but I know we all have our own viewpoints and decisions, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I wouldn't want to force anyone to go support something that they don't believe in. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation. But is there a group out there that's actually doing that type of work? I guess that's my question.
I don't have the answer to that. I don't know if somebody else knows, or I know a couple people have hands up. Does somebody specifically know the?
Yeah, I can mention two briefly, and those are Common Good Missoula, and then Crew on the north side, west side, are two community organizing groups that I think would be very interested in this kind of thing.
So I have done some training with Common Good. I have been part of community organizing with them in the past. And okay, if it's okay, I'll touch base with them and see what's going on in that area. I guess for myself, the need is now, and I'm really frustrated with all these conversations is all, but thank you.
Riley?
Thank you, Katie. I want to touch upon a couple points. One, I apologize for my lamp back here. That's moved like 3 points in this meeting. I'm in the process of moving and trying to find really good lighting. So Will, I resonate with what you said. Same with you, Paul. I feel that. And Laura, I resonate with what you're saying. What is the body, right? What is the group for doing this? I feel like that's us. I feel like we're the Affordable Housing Resident Oversight Committee that has people appointed by forms of government, by different sectors of the city, from every point that is Missoula, that is targeted at looking at affordable housing. And we've been in this process where it's like, what can we do? We've been looking at the trust fund. Now that's kind of taking off, and we're in this really cool space where it's, what else can we do? And so, Will, to touch upon, do we need guidelines? I feel like we all have experience in those areas. Honesty and communication goes a long way. And if there's space in our agendas and our meeting spaces to look at projects and collectively find a solution, to collectively decide, okay, let's support this one, maybe let's write a letter about this one and use that lived experience that we all have, then we don't necessarily tie ourselves down to policies that a year from now may not be accurate. 2 years from now may be completely outdated, because ultimately our community is growing at an exponential rate, and we're seeing a lot of people come in, and there's a lot of funding being moved around. And in order to accurately assess that, we also have to be able to stay on our feet, to be able to be light, and be able to meet these challenges where they're at. So I feel like we can do a lot internally by having discussions like these, and then collectively coming to an agreement on the letters we want to write, how we want to support and move forward. Because ultimately, we all live here, y'all. We're all Missoulians through and through, and we all have a lot of differing opinions. And those opinions together are what is going to lay the foundation for how we can move forward as a committee, let alone a community.
Laura, did you still have a question, or Will? Okay, Will.
Well, first off, just thanks, Laura and Riley. Appreciate your kind of calling out my perspective on this. And this is just a great conversation. I think it's pretty amazing that we're basically all strangers that meet once a month, and we're able to have this constructive of a conversation. So I really do appreciate that. And Laura, I hear your point of view very clearly about just the urgent need. And I think we all joined the committee for that same reason. And Riley, the need to be flexible and not so, just because we say something's a priority now and then 6 months from now, something changes. So I get all that. A couple things I can think about that could be solutions to kind of maybe address all this. One would just be a simple awareness tactic, which is how can we make sure that anytime what's the best way, and I'm sorry I don't know the answer to this, but what's the best way to keep on top of because this was something that was going to the county board too, so it's I wouldn't even have thought, I'm usually more clued into what's going on at the city council level. And so what's our best way to be in the loop, so at least all of us as individuals can be aware of it, notwithstanding what we might be able to do as a committee. And so if anyone has ideas about how you keep tabs on all these things and know when the hearings are coming up in the best way possible, open to suggestions. And then the other thought I had is, I do think, Riley, I hear what you're saying, but I do think there needs to be some level of guidelines, because I think we're talking about a scenario where I think we know some of the developers, we know what they've done in terms of affordable housing in Missoula, but there will be a situation where a development comes in, maybe it's a developer, we have no idea who they are. Maybe they're going to pave over a wetland with 4 different endangered species in it. And we don't necessarily want to just give tacit approval to everything that comes through. So I think some general guidelines, and what I might suggest is if we went down this route, and I think it would require more conversation, but like the guidelines are that it has to have some affordable housing outcome. But I think in our public support that we do that, I think we just have to acknowledge there's going to be other considerations that we're not experts on. We're not experts on wildlife impact. We're not experts on traffic impact. We're not experts on historic preservation, is like the letter that we received today. And so just almost acknowledging that, like, our purview is very limited. We understand from this development, there are going to be X number of affordable units that are going to be developed. We support the goal of bringing these units online, understanding that there are certainly going to be other considerations that need to be addressed that relate to community impact as well, just beyond the housing need. I think that would be an approach I'd be comfortable with, rather than, I've started this on my own when I've done public outreach on other housing developments. And like, I kind of see like, okay, this may not be the best project ever, but it's delivering housing. So I know I want to support it. And I kind of put that into my comments just to acknowledge that nothing's going to be perfect, but it's good enough that we should support it. So those are my thoughts in terms of potential solutions for a way forward.
Emily?
Thanks. I'm really loving this discussion. I appreciate everyone engaging in it. I'm hearing an idea maybe that's forming around maybe a subcommittee that would respond or prepare these letters and then could share them and get the endorsement of the committee. So I don't know if people have energy or interest in that, but that's a way that we've addressed this in committees that I've been on before, that a subset of you would kind of draft it and then you all could finalize it. You could also potentially draft some guidelines that the group could affirm, but I just wanted to offer that. And then I also have the bylaws up. If it's helpful for you all to look at them, just let me know and we can screen share.
Christine?
So Emily was going where my brain was thinking as well, subcommittee, or I'm wondering if while remaining nimble and while continuing to grow through this process, there isn't the possibility of developing a letter that is almost formulaic in support, but that gives us flexibility to respond quickly. And I think in saying that out loud, I also really just want to circle back to the point that Will made as well, is that it can be really easy when you live within the city limits to not pay as much attention to what is happening out in the county. And so how do we hold ourselves or keep ourselves informed and in the loop in a timely manner? Because what we do see, and we all know, is there's this place at which these projects are coming together, but community engagement and involvement just flips in very quickly. And if we're not prepared or informed, it's going to require a lot of time last minute. So I agree. I would love to see a committee be formed. And I'd also love to see us, at least for the time being, and as we're continuing to develop our own skill sets and our relationships as a committee, that we work to create perhaps a formatted letter that we can augment quicker when time allows and when it's needed.
Riley?
Thank you, Katie. So I love subcommittees. Why I say that is, in our coordinated entry system as a community, we have the Oversight Committee, and how we get everything done for Missoula's coordinated entry system is subcommittees. We have a bunch of different agencies who are coming forward all to talk about how are we going to solve housing insecurity for the unsheltered population. And in order to implement those policy changes and everything, we have many different subcommittees that are formed. So I am very much in favor of subcommittees. The benefit of subcommittees is you can get a lot of different minds together to discuss an issue that can then branch out and build relationships, say with people who work at the county level or developers or other agencies and organizations that we may need to be in contact with, so that we as a body can gather more information to make more educated decisions around support or trust fund administration and all of that.
Great. Does anybody want to see the bylaws at the moment? Or do we want to, Is there anybody who would like to be on a subcommittee? Riley? Christine? Will? Laura? Seems like a great group. Okay. Well, I think that's a great idea to have a subcommittee kind of working on that and having a letter and some parameters. Any other thoughts or concerns on both Larchmont or the committee's roles? Or does anybody want to? Oh, go ahead, Will.
Based on what Emily said earlier, I don't know if this is a question either John or Emily or any staff can answer, but I do know, like, there was that development, the Grant Creek development last year or the year before, that I know the city came out in support of that rezone. And I guess what framework does developments, or sorry, I know it's not development services anymore, but like what framework does the city use to decide whether or not it's going to support a project? Obviously, I realize this isn't apples to apples, but just in general, you know, is there any guidance there we could look to?
Sure. So, you know, what staff does, Will, is, you know, our planners consider these projects through a professional lens that considers a variety of factors, both statutory and both based on our ordinances and based on our adopted policies. And those range from our zoning code to our growth policy, to our transportation policy, open space plans, just a wide variety of facilities and infrastructure plans. All of those are sort of part and parcel of the either guidance or rules under which staff has to operate. And by the time staff brings a recommendation based on an application to the city council, they'll have arrived at a professional decision based on all of that. And then council, frankly, can do whatever it wants to. That's as the governing body, they can accept a recommendation of staff. They can modify staff recommendations, again, depending on the nature of the application. If it's a zoning, for example, council doesn't have authority to condition zoning, but certainly conditions subdivisions, can condition townhomes, can operate through development agreements to modify. So there are a lot of tools at council's disposal to either simply take a staff recommendation and adopt it, take that recommendation and deny it. Depending on the denial, there will have to be good reliance on what are called findings of fact, so as to defend against a lawsuit that may consider that council decision capricious or arbitrary. Short version of all that is staff vets projects, works with developers, in many cases gets them to a place where if they can't support the proposal as originally presented, they'll work with the developer to modify that proposal to get to a place where they can support it. All of that depends on whether developer is interested in doing those modifications. It really becomes a business decision for them. And then it ends up before the city council. And I think Councilwoman West would tell you, in her experience and in mine, certainly the advocacy we hear on either side of any proposal is something that we weigh and take into account. I continue to learn something every day, whether I want to or not. And despite having heard countless subdivision and zoning proposals over the years, there is advocacy on either side. that can help me change my mind about something or help me overcome a foregone conclusion, or just think about something differently. So that advocacy does matter. What I try to remind council members, and particularly new council members, is that we are on any given day at the service of about 75,000 people. So even if 100 people show up and say something is terrible, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is terrible. It's terrible for them based on their experience, based on their location, et cetera. But we have, I think, an obligation to consider the larger community interests. And so that's sort of a long way of saying that I do think the advocacy matters. I think being really credible about that advocacy is important. You know, some of what we hear is very reactionary and sometimes misinformed. And we have the benefit by virtue of the work that staff has done, we have the benefit of knowing in pretty great detail the nature of the project that if you're a concerned neighbor, you might not know. So having credibility around that advocacy is important, and frankly, having more on the what I'll loosely call the pro development side. I'll call it the pro housing side. We hear far more advocacy for we shouldn't change a thing, and it's okay. This is too dense, it's too much traffic, all of the things that people legitimately feel are concerns to them. And we rarely, we don't hear often enough from the Lauras of the world who are, their life experience, your life experience, Laura, is that you know damn well we need more affordable housing, and with that there comes change and community tension and some folks who are going to be disappointed or unhappy. And again, having council members who, unless I'm breaking a tie, who are going to make this decision, hear a little bit about the bigger picture and recognize that there needs to be balance is really important. And there are far fewer of those voices at city council meetings than there are folks who are generally opposed to a zoning change, a subdivision, townhome exemption, you name it. And we've tried to, it's been difficult over the years trying to crack that case. How do we get more voices in support of helping shore up council as they make those difficult decisions? And those decisions are made more difficult if you're in a room, whether virtual or real, and it feels like everybody in the world is opposed to this thing, and you're not hearing a peep from anybody saying, yeah, this is something we need. So I think advocacy is important, and I also always I like to remind folks that that council members and I are listening. We don't necessarily always agree, but we are listening, and again, can change our minds. So it's the arguments around land use are often pretty one-sided, and they tend to support the interests of folks who already have a place to live.
Does that answer? What was it, your question?
Yes, yes, very well. Thank you.
I probably over-answered, Will. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's really good to remind all of us that we can also all individually comment, both through city council and through the county on, projects that are coming up that we do want to support and how important that is. Anything else on Larchmont or the roles of the committee? Oh, Paul?
Thanks. I don't know if this is appropriate, and stop me if it's not, but I did want to comment briefly on that letter from Tate Jones there. And in full disclosure, I should say I am on the board of the North Missoula Community Development Corporation, and we received one of these as well. The letter writer points out that his organizations have absolutely no interest in housing, and fair enough. To the extent that they raise concerns about impacts on the areas they are charged with managing, those totally are legitimate and should be addressed. But it seemed to me that the bulk of the letter was commenting on a housing project rather than the impacts to the Fort Missoula area. I'll also say that this is a matter of taste, I suppose, but dense housing development adjacent to protected natural areas is the ideal urban topology to me. That seems like what we should be striving for. And the last thing I'll say is, to be honest, I was a little taken aback by the tone of the letter. I found it to be a little bit aggressive and condescending. And I wonder if that was accurately representing the positions of those organizations, or if that was being written by an individual on their own. Just my comments.
Thanks, Emily. Oh, I think you're on mute.
It's my first day on Zoom. I just wanted to flag that when you all are done with your comment and discussion, that there's a member of the community with their hand raised for public comment.
Great. Any other comments on Larchmont or the committee's roles or discussions? Okay. We can move
I
on.
apologize. Katie, I was looking to raise my hand and
Sorry, go
couldn't
ahead.
find my button fast enough. I think in response and just also having some personal reaction to the letter written by Mr. Tate, I wondered, I am a big fan of doing what we're doing right now, which is engaging in conversation and discourse. And, you know, I understand that those individuals who are working with the city and the county all the time and in elected positions get these types of letters and have interactions with members of the community on a more frequent basis. But there was part of me that after reading it was like, boy, I really wouldn't mind having a conversation with this person to try and understand the perspective, to try and also have an opportunity perhaps to share my own perspective, or perhaps how another portion of the community looks at that potential project or any other project coming down the road. And when we talk about being creative or nimble or leaning into learning, it seems like unless it's ill-advised, which I will lean to the city and Lori, John, Emily, you know, if it's ill-advised and there's a history of poor conversation with this individual, it seems like we might be able to also build a bridge here and create some learning on both sides if we were to invite this person to come and speak with this particular committee. So just a thought.
Nick?
Thanks, Katie. And again, just to, I guess, reiterate, I haven't dove into fact check this, not that it needs to be fact checked, but the letter did claim that federal funds were used in the construction of the golf course itself. Maybe this is a question for John. Is that, I'm assuming that was administered maybe at the state level, not necessarily at the local level. Is there any repercussions for losing that authorization for those funds, or anything, repayments or anything like that should be of any concern in this?
Yeah, so I'm happy to confess that, believe it or not, Larchmont was a little bit before my time in local government, and also I've enjoyed the tremendous benefit of this not being my farm. So I've been a listener on the sidelines largely. Yeah, I mean that there's at least some documentation that dollars other than local dollars were applied here, that there may have been some guarantees as to the long-term use of facility, et cetera. I mean, it's a really complicated deal, and it I've described it, not that anyone was asking me for advice, but I've described the proposal as it stood as a brilliant idea whose time has not yet come. There are very complicated constituencies involved here, and depending on process and product, and the many trade-offs. One of my concerns is there's potential there would have been potential in this case for I think the community to be set back considerably on its heels, just by virtue of the contentious politics associated with the proposal. There's history, historic preservation is at play, open space, parks and recreation is at play. There are neighbors, including the Missoula Country Club. There are transportation factors to consider. So it's a fairly big, complicated deal, and which is why I'm really glad that we're working on I think much shorter term and likely more productive endeavors around reforming our rules and regulations, processes, purchasing land for housing development through the city and through our redevelopment agency, investing in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This project on paper, I think, looks big and sexy and is a lot of units, but it's also, I think it's also fraught with peril. Tate has been an advocate for historic preservation at Fort Missoula for many years, and I know Tate, and he's also been a great advocate he was a great advocate for our Fort Missoula Regional Park, and he brings a perspective to this for sure, but I think we have better short-term opportunities to actually get more done quickly and meaningfully than necessarily having what I imagine would be a 10-year squabble over Larchmont Golf Course. And I'll give you a specific example. The city of Missoula owns about a 9-acre parcel that's immediately to the north of Larchmont. And we're currently working on the disposition of that property. It requires a little bit of heavy lifting on the part of staff. It requires action by the city council. But we think that piece is highly developable, and then we can use those resources for some park replacement where we're lacking on the north side as we really start to build dense housing over there. So there are a lot of moving parts, and something like Larchmont for me ends up being a bit of a distraction to the other, I think, more tangible and much more immediate work that we can do. Nine acres, it's clearly not 130, but we can do a lot with 9 acres in Missoula, Montana. And so I think we're going to chip, from my perspective, we chip away at that stuff. And I think I'm really glad that the county is doing its lands inventory and beginning to develop a sense of what is surplus to the county. It's something that we've done. And I think the county is also interested in that they may be in a position to do some acquisition if they can dispose of some property that just doesn't make sense for them on a variety of fronts. So a lot of folks, I think, are moving in the right direction here. But Larchmont's a lot more complicated than meets the eye, and I frankly think the commissioners by taking the incremental step of looking at all of its land inventory. I think that was probably the right next thing to do. Just my opinion, and again, I'm glad that I am not the steward of 18 holes of anything.
Thank you. We are running short on time, so if there's not any other comments on this portion, why don't we move on to the public comment from the attendee?
All right, Connor McCauley, you should be able to talk.
Hey, I'm a reporter with KECI. I just wanted to clarify that when Katie, Riley, and Paul say they're disappointed with the decision, is that decision the county commissioner's decision to go forward on reviewing all property assets and not developing this property?
I'll clarify my comment, and my comment was I was disappointed that the feasibility study didn't move forward, but I am hopeful on the looking at all of the county properties.
And Connor, I'll speak for myself in saying this. I honestly don't have all the facts with everything. As someone who works for a housing nonprofit, specifically that deals with the unsheltered population, anytime the word housing is said and then housing doesn't come into existence, I'm going to be disappointed.
Okay. No, that's perfect. I just wanted to clarify. Thanks so much.
Okay, so then moving on to any committee member comments in general. Riley, did you have one? Your hand was up.
Yeah, I raised it again. Thanks, Katie.
Okay.
I want to touch upon what Christine said, just for some clarification. This might be the outreach worker in me. We find it really, really awesome on the homeless outreach team to build relationships and have conversations with people. I like shaking hands. I like building that bridge. I don't know if necessarily in every situation it would be appropriate to like go have a friendly conversation with someone. I'm down to do that if that's in the best interest of the committee, to begin building these bridges with individuals within our community so that we can better understand how to operate within our role as the Affordable Housing Oversight Committee. If I'm going off on a tangent here as well, someone please like reel me back in. But
No, I think that's great if you want to reach out and have those conversations. Yeah. Any other committee member comments? I guess I have one that's more schedule related, just bringing up, and maybe it's more appropriate as we get down to announcement of the next meeting, but just questioning if we should maybe think about having a meeting in person at some point soon. I know that City Council is moving that direction, and that, you know, a month from now, assuming numbers are looking better, it would be really nice to meet in person.
Agreed.
Yeah, so I'll just throw that out there as something to consider as we look at the schedule for next month and going forward.
So Katie, we're in the process of discussing how we staff committees and locations because of our various technological requirements, particularly around broadcast, et cetera. None of that is quite cooked yet. But knowing your interest in the interest of other city committees, we're keeping that in mind. So as we march down a path here a little bit, I think we might have some clarity about when we might when we might be able to come together in person. And I think in some cases too, particularly for committees where with a few exceptions, folks haven't actually ever seen each other in real life, we might be able to make some exceptions around that to have this committee meet sooner than later, or sooner than others might if they meet in person at all. So I'm just going to ask you to stay tuned a little bit on that, but I recognize the interest and appreciate it.
Will?
This maybe is kind of addressed by the mayor's comment, but just wondering, do we think if we started hosting meetings in person, there would still be the flexibility that if any committee member wanted to join over Zoom, they could still do that?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
so we're intending on Monday night, we're actually doing a test run of a hybrid city council meeting. So we will have the webinar technology as well as people in the room. I can tell you that our tech run through this afternoon. I wouldn't describe it as painful, but it was not without a glitch or two. And we're going to have some growing pains there. And we also have limited space where we have all of that technology in place. And one of the things we're doing is actually adding what staff is calling, I don't know if they're Zoom rooms or something to that effect, but we're working on that as well. But yeah, I don't think, my hunch is, but we would likely never do a just in-person meeting. I think we've sort of obligated ourselves, and I think it's the right thing to do as well, to have those remote options available to folks for all sorts of reasons.
Great. Any other committee member comments? If not, let's move on to the unified round update.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to update that we got 11 full applications in the unified round. The scoring committee is meeting next week to score those applications. We are following the housing urban development timeline, which takes applications till March 31st. So we won't be taking these applications to council until later April. And I didn't add this to the agenda, but I also wanted to introduce Emily Schenkel. She is our new committee member. So welcome, Emily.
Hi, Emily. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you for inviting me as an alternate. I appreciate it. And I'm excited to learn more through more meetings through the committee. So thanks for having me. I'm a community member, and I've been in town for 3 years now, and I go by she and her.
And Emily or Aubrey, correct me if I'm wrong, we are down one. We had one member who did recently resign, and that was going to be opened up in May for that position. Was that right? To apply for the...
Yeah, so Jerry's family is moving. So she's stepping down, unfortunately. And we are still figuring out how we're going to move forward with that opening. Because we are going to have an open recruitment process for 1-year terms that will open in April, we're exploring whether we should include that role or do an appointment now.
Great, thank you. Any other staff comments? Okay, so then the next meeting is, sorry, I don't have my calendar in front of me, the 13th of April. And for now, we'll just assume it's going to be online, or we'll be in touch if not. Great. Then I thank you all, and I'll adjourn the meeting, and I hope everybody has a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lori, for the
Good
presentation.
night.
Thank you, Lori.